What's good, guys? Welcome back to another chapter of Chainsaw Man, and it's been a long 2 weeks since the last chapter was released, considering that Chainsaw Man switched back to its bi-weekly release schedule. And Fujimoto is definitely cooking something special, something absolutely amazing. With this chapter, at least for me specifically, having one of the best plot twists, or at least a twist or expectations that I've seen so far in part 2 of the series. So we're going to take our time and going through chapter 119. I have my notes on the side and the bullet points with me. We're going to be talking about some things I noticed, but also what the community noticed. Details that may be important down the line and themes that Fujimoto may actually give his own commentary about. But let's not waste any time and jump into Chainsaw Man chapter 119, Thief. So the chapter starts with the cover page and we see Denji's apartment, which is named Tatsuki apartment, obviously after Tatsuki Fujimoto. He always finds a way to actually include himself in the manga, with Denji and Asa standing in front of the door to Denji's apartment before their date, giving each other the side eye and just making the blankest expressions I've ever seen. And as they're getting ready to walk into Denji's apartment, Denji goes over the 3 unbreakable rules with Asa. And they're not as serious as we all thought they were, at least on the surface, but they do have big implications. The first rule, number 1, that he tells Asa is don't open the door to any other apartment other than mine. Which Asa is like, well, why would I do that? That's common sense. And Denji's like, oh yeah, I guess that is common sense. Now, the reason why this could be important is because Denji might actually own the apartments in all of the apartment complex. Now, this could be for 2 reasons. It could be out of the safety of other people around them, but also we saw with Makima, she seemed to like to be able to control and own all of her living space. I mean, after all, in part 1, it's actually said that she owned the 2nd and the 3rd floor of her apartment complex. And as Denji and Asa go into the apartment, we find out the 2nd unbreakable rule. Don't open the fridge, which is pretty straightforward. And Asa's like, why would I open someone else's fridge? That's just rude. Now, I'm not really sure why that is, but rest assured, Denji doesn't have any human flesh in there. After all, eating Makima was a one-time thing for him. And as they're inside the apartment, we get a nice view of Denji's living situation. Now, obviously, from the looks of it, it's not as big as Aki's apartment. I mean, that apartment was more like a 1-bedroom with a washer and dryer inside. And I mean, it had an amazing view of the Japanese skyline. This is more like a studio apartment, which makes sense. I mean, Aki left Denji a pretty good amount of money, but obviously without the salary to keep it up, he wouldn't be able to keep on affording to live there. Another thing I noticed is it's surprisingly clean and organized, which, given where Denji comes from, I mean, a deep place of absolute poverty, is pretty amazing. Now, this could be because of 2 reasons. Denji himself has matured enough and remembered what Aki taught him about keeping his environment clean, which is likely the case, because at the end of part 1, when Aki and Power were both out of the picture, Denji was keeping his apartment up pretty well, actually. Or, realistically, this could hint at Nayuta's influence on him, because let's be honest here, Denji owns more than 5 of Makima's Alaskan Huskies. He's going to school. He's fighting devils on his free time, and he's out here hustling money to support him and Nayuta with the hopes of saving up enough money to send her to college. I mean, I'll be honest here, if I were in that situation like that, the place would probably look worse for wear. Other things I noticed as Asa's looking around Denji's apartment watching the movie with him, we see that Denji and Nayuta keep track of their farts. They scheduled their meals, which at first I thought was Nayuta's influence on Denji, but considering that he spent months on end making virus meals out of Makima at the end of part 1, it's something he picked up doing and probably kept that as just a general routine. And another thing I noticed, and I could be wrong about this, but there are either stickers on the door or those are actually dents, which is the first indication that Nayuta has access to some of the same abilities that Makima had. Like the signature finger bang that she's pretty much infamous for. And the final thing I'll touch on, and these 2 are the most important things I noticed and I'll touch on later in the video, we see a school bag that is presumably Nayuta's and 2 plants. One that is Denji's, which is growing well, and Nayuta's, which is slowly shivering away and dying. Now, after Denji tells Asa the 2 rules, which on the surface aren't that big, it's just Denji trying to prepare Asa and set the tone with her, he gives rule number 3. And as he's explaining it, we get an idea of Nayuta's personality and how she acts. And Denji explains that she's a problem child with an extreme personality, and that even though she's out walking the dogs, she'll be home soon. And while he's saying that, we actually get a shot of her silhouette walking the dogs, which is definitely a callback to Makima. Just with the way that she's dressed, with the shirt tucked in, and the way that she holds herself reminds me a lot of her. And it really does make me question, even though Nayuta's been given a fairly normal life with lots of love, just how different would she be from Makima, who was raised by the Japanese government to be as cold-blooded and as manipulative as they could make her. Now, rule number 3, the most important rule according to Denji is no matter what, don't make out with me in front of her. And this really did make me laugh. That he would just say that to her, especially to a girl he likes, kind of shows how socially inept Denji is just as a person. Because he says it in the most casual way possible without thinking what that could imply, what he thinks of Asa, and kind of shows that he might have ulterior motives. I mean, it's not something that I would say personally, or at least there are better ways of putting it out and implying certain things about Asa and putting her on a spot like that. But of course, Denji didn't mean it like that, and he knows Asa isn't that type of girl. I mean, he didn't actually have any ulterior motives with him. Like, I'm guessing a lot of people thought that he would. And of course, in typical Asa fashion, she becomes flustered, a bit confused, and kind of offended by this, and shuts down and begins to push Denji away. And her reaction to just the entire situation really just made me laugh, because throughout part 2, we don't normally get a lot of reactions of Asa. We don't normally get to see a lot of her personality. And when we do, it generally goes from being depressed to happy to confident, and sometimes just being dead serious. And they're typically in very brief moments. Now, obviously, she's nervous. I mean, it's her first time going over to a boy's house, so she doesn't really know what to expect from Denji, how Denji would act around him, so she is going to be more in her shell. She isn't going to be as confident or as talkative as we kind of seen from her in the last chapters. So it makes sense that she would be that quiet and not talk at all. But in this moment, she confidently says that that isn't the reason why she came over. And she says specifically, why would you even bring that up? Do you think I like you? And Denji is just in utter shock. He says, I mean, you asked me on a date, and I figured you must 90% like me. And then also says, there's no way I like you. On the contrary, I hate you. And Denji's just trying to figure out, maybe I did something wrong, or maybe I just misread the situation. And Asa goes into this serious face and says, you have rules to obey or die, right? Well, so do I. You should just stay away from me, Denji, or you'll wind up dead. And the only reason why I ever went on a date with you is just because I wanted a distraction. Now, what Asa says in this moment is big for a character. It shows how much she actually does like Denji and her confidence, but also her depression. Because even though she says that she hates Denji and was only using him like how, sadly, he's been used for a good majority of his life, especially the woman in his life, Himino, Rize, Makima, we know this isn't exactly true. That Asa actually does want someone that she can relate to and who accepts her for who she is. It's clear to me she doesn't want to be alone anymore, and we know she caught feelings for Denji at the end of their first date at the aquarium, because I mean, she couldn't stop thinking about Denji. I think she's lying to him, and I think she's lying to herself and convincing herself that she doesn't like him in a way to protect him. I mean, for her to directly try to ruin Yoru's plan and even directly expose her under the risk of having her body taken over completely, which would effectively kill her, shows how much she actually cares about him. How confident she's starting to get going against Yoru, who she was initially afraid of at the beginning, but slowly she's starting to kind of grow more of a backbone. But it also shows how very little she cares about herself. How she just wants this nightmare to be over with and to go on to live a happy, normal life, to have friends, to not be alone. Things that as long as Yoru is with her, she'll likely never be able to achieve. She'll never be able to be free to live out her life, and I'm sure a part of her is starting to say, if Yoru took over my body, maybe it wouldn't be such a bad thing. I mean, sure, Asa wants to live, but could you really call the situation that she's in living? Now Denji kind of takes all of it in, just thinks to himself that he was used again, something that he promised would never happen to him again. But interestingly enough, he does kind of like Asa and wants to make things work with her. And he goes through a deep thought process as to why Asa doesn't like him. And at first he thinks maybe it was feeding her starfish. And then when he sees a dog in the movie that he's watching, he thinks to himself, somebody once told me that I smelled like red dog. I thought it was a compliment, but maybe that meant that I stink. Now, this moment he's referring to could go all the way back to the first chapter of Chainsaw Man, where Denji is betrayed by the Yakuza boss, and he does seem to be misremembering what actually happened. Yakuza boss says that Denji was obedient like a dog, but he hated dogs and he couldn't stand the smell of them. Which, if this is the moment that Fujimoto is referring to, it kind of shows us that Denji might be misremembering certain things and certain events, possibly from part 1, maybe to cope with the trauma that he's been through. And Denji sums it up to the reason why Asa doesn't like him is because he stinks, and that maybe he shouldn't be sleeping with the dogs. Which isn't the reason at all, but it's nice to see that Denji is beginning to think about the things harder than he has in the past, and he's at least trying to read the room and solve the problems he finds himself in. Although this shows that he has a lot more room to grow. I mean, in the previous chapters, he made it clear that he would think more for himself and that he wouldn't be used by other people anymore. Because for him to try and think to himself that maybe he can still make things work with Asa, despite her admitting to just using him, shows how he's still a bit subservient to people, or at least he refuses to face up to the actual problems and accept them for what they really are. And when he's about to ask Asa, well, do dogs stink? Guru switches in Asa's body when it's the second best panel of the chapter and a really unexpected moment, and breaks the third most important rule and kisses Denji. Now, I'll be honest, I wasn't expecting this to happen, but we know when it comes to Yoru, she is willing to do anything and everything to make sure she achieves her goal of killing Chainsaw Man. Even if it meant offering up her body, or well, Asa's body, to Denji, which if Nayuta didn't come home, she probably would have done. And obviously we see that Yoru was going to turn Denji with a weapon with the signature head pat. Now, she didn't say Denji's spinal cord sword, so we don't know if it would have worked. But seeing how Denji admitted that he liked Asa, it implies maybe that since he is a hybrid, that's why the ability doesn't work on him. But it's totally possible with enough physical affection, it could stretch into the ability to where we could actually see something happen to Denji. Now, more importantly, we actually have two details in this panel. When Yoru went to save the situation between Asa and Denji and kiss Denji, Denji closed his mouth, which really shows how hard he's trying not to break the rules so Asa doesn't get killed by Nayuta, along with having the PTSD when it comes to actually being kissed by Roman. Because his first kiss, he had a vomit in his mouth, and his second one, he had his tongue bit off. But it implies maybe he realizes the person he's kissing in that moment isn't Asa. It's been a hot debate in the community as to what Asa's appearance actually looks like to the cast in part 2. Does she have Yoru's appearance with the signature eyes and the scars on her face, or does she look like her regular self? The biggest indicator to Denji though should also be how she acts. One moment Asa said she hated him, and the next she's all over him. Her demeanor changed entirely as if she was a different person, which I mean, in this moment, she is. And Denji finally having a close up to her face, but mainly her eyes, he might finally be able to put two and two together and maybe say, hey, you know, her eyes are similar to Nayuta. And I mean, she is a devil, so maybe the person in front of me is also a devil. Another detail I noticed is Yoru is actually blushing. She's sweating. So she definitely feels an attraction to Denji at this moment. After all, last chapter it was said by Yoru that her and Asa share the same emotions since they do share the same brains that's been split in half. So it's possible maybe over time she might feel something towards Denji. But right now she still sees him as a means to an end, similar to how she sees Asa as a means to an end. But it's totally possible she could change as a person and become more of a human instead of a devil as the story goes along. In any case, before anything else can happen, we finally get a full shot of Nayuta and the dogs barging through the door. And we can see she resembles Makima to the T. If you said that this was Makima on New Game Plus, or at least what young Makima likely looked like, I would honestly believe it. I mean, Nayuta's physical appearance and her hairstyle, especially the signature Makima braid, and the similar wardrobe to the fear and the aura she conveys, even without saying anything, is exactly like Makima. Look, even though she seems like this normal little girl, something is incredibly off about her, incredibly demonic about her. I really do like that. The fact that Fujimoto was able to convey this extremely well despite most of the fans already knowing who Nayuta is if they read part 1 is pretty amazing. And obviously most people didn't expect her to be aged up as far as she has. I mean, the last time we saw her, she appeared to be a sweet, innocent little girl throwing up peace signs, versus now, where less in a year, she aged up all the way to a young teenage girl who has probably killed people in the past and has a controlling personality. I kind of found it to be an interesting decision on Fujimoto's part that he chose to go with this option with her character, and I really am interested to see what role she'll actually play later on in part 2 of the story. In the final panel, we get Nayuta, who proceeds to call Yoru a thief and does the signature finger point that Makima was known for and shoots a chain into Yoru's head. Now, I'm not too sure if this was actually an error or an artistic choice, but when a chain goes through Yoru's head, there isn't any blood. Although, if I remember right, whenever Makima would use the chains, it was always to control someone. It wasn't ever done in a lethal way, so it could just be Nayuta trying to control Yoru. Now, when she called Yoru a thief, this I feel can be interpreted in a lot of ways. She could be referring to Denji's affection. She could feel that his affection that he gives all belongs to her. And Makima herself even implies this at the end of part 1 and acted the same way, although that was in a lot more extreme way. It could be why Denji seemingly has no friends at school, why he seems to be so isolated and alone, because if he were to make any friends, it's totally possible that Nayuta would just kill them because they will be stealing the affection away from her. Or what I could find to be the most interesting is she knows that Yoru took Asa's body, and she's trying to actually separate them. Because throughout part 2, we've seen crows follow Asa and Yoru in multiple chapters, and we know Makima could use animals as surveillance cameras and wires to gain information without anyone noticing. I mean, Denji himself did say that Nayuta was smart enough to go to college, and we all know how smart Makima was. I mean, her intelligence was superhuman. So it wouldn't shock me if Nayuta figured out who Yoru really was and Asa's current situation that she's found herself in. And the final thing that could really back this up is the sense of smell. Makima could smell if a person was a human or a devil, although that's how she identified people, but seeing how Nayuta may have similar, if not the same abilities, she would be able to know off the bat who Yoru was and that she's possessing Asa's body, considering that Asa's body would give off the scent of a devil, or in this case, likely the scent of a hybrid, given that Asa is still technically alive. Although this would depend on how Nayuta views people and her overall thoughts, which leads me to make the final talking point of the video. Makima is able to identify people and devils based on his scent, although that was because she viewed everyone below her as dogs and didn't differentiate people, similar to how people can't recognize the difference between dogs by their faces. And this will really play into how Nayuta is being raised and just how much you believe in nature versus nurture. The idea that a person's personality is caused by genes or biological factors versus a personality being formed from societal factors. And Nayuta may be Fujimoto's commentary on this concept. From what we see from the apartment, Denji is trying to raise Nayuta in a normal life, with a life that was better than Makima ever had. He's trying to teach her compassion and to care about things through plants, although from what we've seen in this chapter, it isn't exactly working. I mean, the plant Nayuta is taking care of is withering away, and she immediately goes in and tries to kill Asa for breaking the simple rule of taking Denji's affection. And seeing how scared Denji was at the idea of Asa coming over to his house with Nayuta around last chapter tells us this isn't the first time something like this has happened, and shows us that she may be more close to Makima than we all honestly hope for. The silver lining in this, though, is the school bag. The fact that Nayuta was able to go to school despite being a problematic child is a good sign. She's able to cooperate with other people, possibly be friends with them, to form genuine, equal relationships with them, despite knowing that if she wanted to, she could just control them. And the fact that she seems to care about Denji, genuinely care and not necessarily view him as property, more like a crazy younger sister, older brother type of relationship, is already a lot better than how Makima ever was as a person. And shows that there is a little bit, if not a sliver of hope, that Nayuta may actually turn out differently from Makima. Now, I'm curious to see how Yoru react to this, or if she'll even recognize the Control Devil, maybe even reference Makima, and we might gain some insight of what she was doing during that entire event. Because from what we know, Makima was on the hunt for the War Devil, the Death Devil, and the Famine Devil, and she actually did intend on killing all of them, despite actually being sisters with them. So we could actually see a little bit, or a bit of a glimpse of how Makima was before she came to Earth and Yoru's relationship with her. I'm also curious to see Denji's reaction to just everything that's happened in this chapter, because he's definitely going through it. But it'll be interesting to see if he's able to actually put two and two together and just how he actually disciplines Nayuta. Because, from what we know or from what we see right now, Nayuta has seemingly killed Yoru and Asa, or at least she's trying to control them. And seeing how Denji will actually discipline her and maybe kind of talk her out of doing this is going to be kind of interesting. It'll definitely show the relationship, and really is going to be kind of fun to see who exactly is the superior one. Because of course, even though Denji is a lot older and arguably a lot stronger than Nayuta, Nayuta is still a lot more intelligent than Denji will probably ever be in his entire life. But that was Chainsaw Man chapter 119. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.